That's actually, oh my. Thank you. Now I have to quieten down. Ooh, that may be tough. Okay. So the third time. Third time. When's the third time? Or fourth time? How about when his mother and the brothers went looking for Jesus? All right, so those are the 4 times that we know, other than the birth, that Mary was actually there. So when you read this, to me, a couple of interesting things just jump out at me. Number one, verse 4. John writes this, and he says, the mother of Jesus. And when Mary says this to Jesus, here's a need. They run out of wine. They need wine. What does Jesus say? Even before that. Okay. But even before that, what's the first word out of his mouth there? Woman. Oh, man. Do you go home and talk to your mother or wife like that? Woman?
Depends.
It depends on if you won't be in trouble. I don't know. It might be worse than that at my house. Yeah, it might be. Anybody, that word jump out at anybody else how strong that word seems?
Like you didn't know her or something.
Well, okay.
The Greek term is geni, which is a term of respect.
Okay. And I agree totally with that. If you look at the Greek word, that is a soft word in the Greek. It is not like woman. It's more woman. And it had that, the Greek word had that affection built into that word. So it really doesn't translate well into our world, number one. But when you read the rest of that, was there a little bit of, Mama, why'd you ask me that? Mama, I really hadn't planned on starting necessarily the public part of my ministry today. And it's still humming, and I know it's humming. I can't help it. I'll move in a minute. Maybe a little bit of, Mama, why'd you ask that question? But if we look, he still ends up doing what his mama's requested basically for him to do, and that's take care of things today. No, lesson number one, even his mama knew that he could take care of things. Good lesson for us. How did his mama know that he could take care of things? That was my next question. How did his mama know?
He is the Son of God.
Okay. She had been prepared even, before conception, birth, that this was a special child.
Yes, sir.
Okay? You think he might have done something too? You mentioned the events. We mentioned the events of the temple where she went and got him. How many kids at 12 are going to be teaching in the temple?
Just one.
Just one. That's pretty special. Did he do something else? I don't know. Did he perform a miracle in private? I don't know. It's not recorded. But his mama knew, his mother knew that he was special and he could take care of whatever needed to be taken care of. That's lesson number one. So what did Mary tell the guys to do? There's servants around here. So that's the next part. She basically says to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Rick, you want to pick up there at verse 6 and read through about verse 12 for us?
And there were set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Jesus saith unto them, fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he saith unto them, draw out now and bear unto the governor of the feast. And they bare it. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made
All right, so after Mary tells them, do what he says. The story goes on to tell us there's these 6 stone pots, if you will. And, why does it say 20 to 30 gallons? Well, in those days, they did not have, what is it called when you make things to specs? Standards. They did not have a huge standard on specs. In fact, those 6 water pots could have been even different shapes and sizes to some degree. But they were still rather large. What were they for? They're to hold the water for their purification. So what is this purification?
Like washing of your hands?
Yes. Yes. Primarily for washing of hands, anything that needs kind of washing before you go in and you commingle with the folks. It might even be, do you wash your feet? Do you kind of wash your underarms where you're sweaty and smelly maybe? But mostly washing hands is what it was for. So they have these pots. The actual measure of these pots was probably 20 to 30 gallons apiece. So it is supposed that these individuals put 100 to 150 gallons of water in these pots. Well, that would serve a lot of people, wouldn't it? That'd serve a lot of people. So they put water in there, they fill it to the brim, and then they start taking it out. And here's where it kind of becomes interesting for me, because I'm one of those, I like the details, Clint. I can't help it. But they take it to the master of ceremonies. He gives it out, and it's wine at that point. And these servants knew, because they knew they put water in the pots, and now the master of the ceremonies is telling them, we have wine for the guest. So where did the water become wine? Was it in the pots? Did it go from water to wine in the pot? Did it go from water to wine in the cup on the way? I'm a detailed guy, Rick. I'm sorry.
Does it matter?
Does it matter? This does matter. How long does it take to make wine?
Weeks.
Weeks, if not months. That's important. This went from water to wine in, minutes, seconds, hour. It wasn't months and weeks. That is important. Go back to John chapter 1. What did it say? What did John say about the Word? He was in the beginning. And he was basically creator with God. So this first miracle proves that he can take something that he created and immediately turn it into something else. He basically did chemistry in a second or a minute. And he didn't have to go through 10 steps. If anybody ever studied chemistry, I'll be back to you. Hang on just a second. Hold that thought. In chemistry, when we studied chemistry, it usually took at least 3 to 5 steps to get from A to Z. And this was just boom.
Satan, when he tempted him in the wilderness, knew that he could turn stones
To bread.
to bread.
Yep.
So, and we know that can't be done.
Right. And we know he turned bread into he turned bread into more bread, and he turned fish into more fish. I'll get my story right in a minute. So he has control of the physical, and he has shown it. And if everything is correct, this is his first sign. I meant to start out, Terry. The book of John records 7 signs. Did you talk about that last week? Okay. There's 7 signs recorded in the book of John. 3 of them are recorded, I believe. Let me get my number right. So either 3 or 4 are recorded in the other Gospels, and these others are not. And this is one of the ones I believe that is not. This one is not recorded anywhere else, only in the book of John. So it goes back to what John's story begins in. Jesus was in the beginning. Jesus was with the creation. He has control of the creation. And we'll get some more out of this in a little while too, as far as application. The other interesting thing is, we talked about how long it takes to make wine. It typically takes longer to make good wine. And this wine is not just as good as the beginning. And typically that's what they did, is they served the best first. What happens after you start tasting something? Brother John, if I eat something with a hot pepper in it, guess what happens? My taste buds get desensitized. I can't taste as good after that. So if these folks have already started drinking the better wine, guess what happens after that? It could be the worst wine after that. Nobody knows the difference. But here in this story, this wine is as good, the way I read it, it's even better to me than what they started with. And that's not typical with these feasts. Typically they serve the good and then they serve the bad. And part of that was, like I say, that you don't taste the bad as being bad as much after you've already had the good. You brought muffins to the office yesterday, because we had blueberries and strawberries. And Kim says, make sure you eat the strawberries first because the blueberries are sweeter. If I eat the blueberry muffins first and they're sweeter, guess what? The strawberry muffins don't taste as good and they're not near sweet. So again, it goes back to that, sensitizing the taste buds to some degree. This is his first sign. What about this manifesting his glory? Anybody have a comment on that part? It's proof. It is definitely a proof. And at least publicly, this, I guess, is, is a sign. It's the first manifestation of his glory. I don't know that there's a whole lot more to this. But what did this do? What was the important thing that this did for those folks that day? Especially those folks around him. They believed. Look at the last part of verse 11. And his disciples believed in him.
And strangely enough, at the beginning of the chapter, we're told that he and his disciples and his mother were invited to the feast, to the wedding. But down here in verse 12, we're finally told that his brethren were also there.
Right.
We didn't know they were invited before.
No, we did not.
In verse 12, the disciples believed because of this sign. The brethren did not.
That's what I was going to say. That was the next interesting point is, and we know that later because we know later that it was way, way toward the end of his ministry and or his crucifixion and or his resurrection before his family believed. Now, I'm not talking about Mary, but before his brothers believed. It is weird. It's one of those things, you can't trust family, who can you trust?
You didn't grow up around my family.
I don't agree with everything my sister says, but for the most part, I trust my sister. Now, I know there are scenarios where, you kind of go, I don't know if I trust that person, and I get that. I know some other family situations where I make myself scratch my head and I go, how do they trust each other? But one thing I know in my family, my sister and I, we want our family, we are going to look out for our family. I can trust that. And I can trust she's going to do her job, and she's going to trust I'm going to do mine. And again, put yourself in this situation. If somebody just walked out there, if one of these servants walked there and said, hey, Rick, you'll never believe what happened in the backyard. We filled up water pots, and it became wine. And some lady's mother told, some mother told us to do what her son said. We did it. Wow. Did those guys believe? They knew. It doesn't say they believed, but they knew. So what else can we take from the story of this? First miracle, where does it occur? At a wedding. What does Ephesians chapter 5 talk about? The church being the bride. Symbolism. Is this part of some symbolism of how important marriage is going to be? And how important the discussion of the marriage between Christ and his church is going to be? Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's coincidence that, this was one of the first miracles that he did was at a wedding. Are we stretching it? Maybe, but I don't think so. What about the water to the wine? What do we use today to commemorate the blood of Jesus? We use grape juice. Same thing that they used as wine in that day. Is that coincidence that he turned this into a symbol at his first miracle? You want to say something? Go ahead. Moses' first miracle was turning water to blood. Yep. That is interesting. I'm glad you reminded me of that because I'd read that and I'd forgot it. So if you look at Moses' first miracle, that would have been with Herod, I think, right? During the plagues, or was that before? Pharaoh, yes, not Herod. I did that 2 or 3 weeks ago, Scarlett. I called the wrong leader. So with Pharaoh's, one of the first plagues turned the water into blood, and now we're turning the water into wine. And we have the symbolism from the blood of the cross, the commemoration and memorial with the fruit of the vine. Yes.
Forsaken a lot of their
Rights and customs. Mm-hmm.
all the water pots empty.
And they're just empty. Because apparently it says they filled them to the brim, so they at least were not full. And like you say, could they have been sitting there empty? I don't disagree. They could have been. Just sitting to the side. Basically just doing nothing. Had no job. And that it made me remember something else about this discussion. Filling those pots with water produced a positive result. What is our body called sometimes in the Bible? A vessel. Clay pot, a vessel. And if we fill ourselves with the right stuff, we can be the same thing as this good wine. We can be a positive influence on people around us. The bad. Yep. If you're around computers, you know the short term GIGO. What does GIGO stand for? Garbage out. Garbage in, garbage out. So, same thing. So, verse 12, they went down to Capernaum. They'll stay a few days. And then there's going to be a few more days. And this next section begins, and I don't know if we'll get through it all, Terry. We'll cover as much as we can. And if I was going to tell everybody, I hopefully will be here to teach again next week. And then I'm going to be out of town and out of country for a couple of weeks. I get my sabbatical, hopefully, for a couple of weeks. And Terry will be back with you for at least 2 weeks. But like I say, let's cover as much of this cleansing of the temple as we can. So the first part of this discussion to me is, okay, we're cleansing the temple. Where else do we know Jesus cleansed the temple? When we look at the other Gospels, in space and time, when did Jesus clear the temple in the other Gospels? They record, each one of them records one time Jesus cleared the temple. John records one time Jesus cleared the temple.
Wrote the money changers at one time.
Right. But where in his ministry? At what point in time in his ministry did he clear out the temple in those other gospels, in those synoptic gospels? Very last. Basically, after he entered Jerusalem. That day, the week before his death. He cleans the temple that week. We know that. So here we have in John a recording, and we talked about the fact, how many Passovers does John tell us about in his gospel? 3. This is the first. So is John being historically inaccurate in where he puts this? Anybody besides Terry know where the clue is? Go down to verse 20. Let's look at verse 20, and let's deal with this accuracy, inaccuracy deal just to begin with. So as this is coming up, Jesus, they asked Jesus, what sign do you show for us with these things? Jesus answered them, destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Verse 20 says, then the Jews said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple. Historically, it's recorded that Herod, one of the Herods, and I don't know which one, but one of the Herods started rebuilding the temple at about 19 to 20 BC. So if you add those 19, 20 years to approximately 28 to 30, where Jesus started his ministry, the math's really close. Close enough to go, this was not necessarily toward the end of the ministry. And the fact that this is recorded apparently in chronological order, I think fits too. Did you see anything else, Terry, that helps that argument? I don't think there's no question in my mind this happened at the very beginning. All right, let's read what my mouth's working faster, or my brain's working faster than my mouth this morning. Let's start verse 13 and read down through 17. Mike, you got 13 through 17. You want to read that for us?
And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the changers of money sitting. When he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the table, and said unto them that sold doves, take this thing hence, make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. And the disciples remembered that it was written, the zeal of thine house hath eateth me up.
Okay. Terry, I did forget one. There is a statement in verse 15, and making a whip of cords. That is not mentioned in the other 3 accounts of cleansing the temple in the synoptics. That those cords are not mentioned. Why would he do why would he make that whip of cords? Was he gonna beat somebody? Was he gonna whip somebody? I don't really think so. He might have wanted to scare them. Think about this, Brother John. Here comes a carpenter. Or his son, Ben. Carpenters. They're pretty big, strong guys. I know even my friend Larry. Larry's stronger than I am, even though he's a lot smaller. Well, I say stronger. For his size, he's stronger than I am. Just because I'm physically bigger, I'm stronger than he is. But for their size, those carpenters are very strong men. And as a whole, if you looked at the people of Jewish descent, they tended to be, a little smaller, a little more frail. And people at that time were not as large. So bigger, stronger people stood out more. And they looked bigger, badder, uglier. And here he comes with a cord. What are you going to do? I'm going to probably get out of there.
I've often wondered, when we talk about him platinum wheel, that's what you want to call it. He was thinking and praying and, how to handle this.
Yeah, maybe. But the other thing with the cord, has anybody ever moved stock before? If you haven't moved stock very much in your life, you may not be able to relate. I know all the Bryant boys know about stock. What typically what do you want in your hand when you're moving stock? A big stick, or a whip, or a noisemaker, or a hot shot. And why do you want to move the critters along? It's easier if you can touch him from here. He's less likely to kick you. So that was the other reason it may be that he patented or made this whip or fashioned this whip to be able to move the animals out better. All right, Terry, this may be the last thing I get to cover, so if I'm not here, you'll probably pick up about here. Let's talk about what's going on in the temple. So the temple has basically become a business. There's two things that have driven the business: the greed of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the way that currency is in that day and time. What is the currency in that day and time? The Roman coin. Well, guess what? Here I am a Jew, and I have gone a long way. And guess what coin I have in my pocket? I have Roman coin in my pocket. And I come up and I go, I need some money to get my sacrifices. Well, guess what money they took for the sacrifices? Did they take the Roman coin for their sacrifices? Could you pay a Roman coin for a pigeon or a dove or a sheep or a goat? Absolutely not.
You couldn't put the Roman coin in the temple treasury either.
Yes.
And as a reverse of that, I visited Petra, and a young man came up to me, and somebody had given him a tip as a shekel, but he was Muslim. He couldn't have a shekel. He couldn't spend it. He couldn't use it, and begged me to trade it for Jordanian currency.
Right. So you're sitting here in the Jewish temple, and you're going to be a money changer. Well, guess what you do as a money changer? You charge a little. The thing is, Terry, these guys were probably charging a lot. There was probably a little more robbery went on in this deal than there was just a friendly handshake change of money. So the other part to this, the Jews are making money exchanging the money. So here's the other thing. If I've traveled all that long way, guess what I probably don't have? I don't have a dove or a pigeon or a sheep or a goat. And guess what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to go back. Well, if I don't have it and you have it, guess who gets to set the price? You do. So not only were they making more money, extra money, changing the money, they were making more money and extra money selling the critters too. That's why Jesus says, you have turned my Father's house into a house of thieves, basically. Yeah, I mean, and some of them could have not understand counting, and they could have shortchanged them, like Greg said. If you didn't know how to, if you weren't very smart about counting money in that day and age, and you didn't understand the currency and the exchange, they could have taken advantage of you there too. Like you said, instead of giving you, even after they took out their part, if your part was supposed to be 50, what if they gave you 40? Yeah.
Still happens today.
Oh yeah, it still does. Right. 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 Yep. And if you didn't understand their currency, even if you got some at the airport, they could still shortchange you because you don't understand their currency. All right, thank you for your time, your attention, your questions. We'll try to pick up more with the cleansing of the temple next time. Thank you.
That's why they call people Jews now, because they put a Jew about something.
Well, they were also notorious for Jewing prices down. That was the other place that term, because I was called, you remember the sign I have, Clint, in my office? The guy that came in, he showed me this sign. He says, here, how much it's going to cost. And I said, I can't afford that right now. And he pulled it down. I can't afford that. And I couldn't.
Exactly.
And then he ended up calling me a Jew. He got it down to where I could buy the sign, though.